Welcome back to the Bigwater Podcast. Here we are again, trying to bring you something a little different. And surprisingly enough, you guys like the biologist. And so we have reached even deeper into our chest, if you will. These biologist guys, they're kind of like mafia, just so you guys know. They all know each other. And so once we kind of get into that little circle, we've been trying to get something a little different for you. So again, a lot of the stuff we do is Great Lakes focus. A lot of that's Lake Erie, but this one we're going to focus on not Lake Erie primarily. And so I won't talk too much about this because we're going to let the pro do it. And here is the pro, Dan Isermann. Here you are. Thank you and welcome to the Bigwater Podcast.
Nice to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
So, give everybody a little rundown because the one thing I've learned about these biologist guys is you guys are, pardon the term, but it's a little Amish. Okay. You guys all know each other, right? There's a lot of different things. You're working with this organization, but you guys are financed by this or this. There's a lot of things going on. And for us civilians, as I like to say, we don't always know how that's going. And it's good that you guys all work together because I've done stuff with the USGS. We did a tagging thing that was with Ohio DNR. And so it's great you guys all work together. But explain exactly kind of what you're doing and some of the stuff we're going to talk about.
Sure. So I also work for the U.S. Geological Survey in a slightly different role. I run the Wisconsin Cooperative Fishery Research Unit, and I'm stationed at the University of Wisconsin Stevens Point. So we're like this joint collaboration between the federal government, the university, and then also state agencies like the Ohio DNR. But I work a lot with Wisconsin DNR and Michigan DNR. And yeah, some of it is like I've worked in 5 different states at this point, all on walleye a lot, and so you just meet a ton of people. And I did work in Ohio on the central basin of Lake Erie for a year back in the early 2000s, so I'm pretty familiar with the walleye fishery there in the system.
So we're going to talk a little bit about, like, we've had people on talking about acoustic telemetry, some stuff with the USGS here, but again, like you said, a different division. But really, that project that we have on the Great Lakes. So people that haven't watched that or listened to some of the podcasts, maybe I encourage you to don't stop now, but go back and listen to some of our other stuff because it'll help out. So again, you jump in here, but acoustic telemetry is what I call like underwater tracking. So we've got receivers down on the bottom, like cell phone towers. We're putting little tags in these fish and they've gotten much smaller, and we're able to see where these fish are at, even some of them what depth they're at, all kinds of crazy things, light sensors in some cases. And most of Lake Erie is covered. Now we've talked about this with Chris Vandergood in the past, and when I say most, pretty much all of Lake Erie is covered. And he even had told us a little bit. He's like, yeah, Green Bay pretty much, and getting to some of Lake Michigan. So tell us, where some of that other stuff is, because we're I don't want to say fluid, or the people that listen to this podcast should be fluid with the Lake Erie stuff. So our whole point today is to kind of, see where this technology is in other places, and then what we've learned from that and how that's different maybe from Lake Erie. So
Yeah, so this really is all related to the Great Lakes Acoustic Telemetry Observation System, or GLaDOS, which is who Chris was. Chris directed it. It was kind of born in Lake Erie, you could say, and then it's just expanded throughout the basin. And it's really related to like supplying the infrastructure, which are these receivers. I'm going to hold one up here. This is what listens for the fish to like enable projects. So if there's questions that agencies have about walleye populations in other parts of the basin and there's funding available, being able to provide those receivers and support a data framework and a place to upload the data. The beauty of it all is none of our walleye swam to Lake Erie, but if they did, we would know it. And fish do things like that. Lake Michigan, Green Bay is really well covered. We now have a receiver basically like every 5 miles out in the open water of the bay and all the major tributaries. Lake Michigan is not fully wired, as we would call it, but through projects with Whitefish on the Michigan side, and then some of our Whitefish work on the Wisconsin side. The northern part of Lake Michigan has a lot of receivers present, but Southern Lake Michigan, and then I'm less familiar with Lake Superior. I would say it's sort of like the next step in the process of where I think you'll see this technology start to move into that basin quite a bit more. So
So not to so a lot of these people do fortunately listen to a lot of the podcasts, but so we don't assume that somebody has maybe listened to a couple of those other ones that we've done with Matt Faust or Chris Vandergood or what have we done a couple actually with Chris. That receiver that you just held up and showed, like roughly what kind of range or how far apart do those have to be to get signal?
So it really depends on the tag that you put in the fish and the conditions that you're working with. So open water with no obstacles and a fairly big tag like we use in a walleye, like you can hear it from a mile away, maybe more. Noisy conditions or in a river below a dam, you're going to lose some of that range. Like our whitefish tags are probably more like a quarter mile read range, but they're like half the size. I mean, this is about the size of the transmitters that we're putting in walleyes, and that's a pretty big tag, and it's pretty loud, so we can hear it pretty far away. But wind and waves all make a difference. Whether it's winter, whether you have ice or not ice, can really make a difference. So it's possible, like with a 5 mile spread, that a fish could avoid a receiver or two, but by spacing them out, and a lot of times in like key locations. So Larson's Reef is a really prominent habitat feature just outside of Sturgeon Bay, where
Mhm.
a lot of fish spend some time. And so
I
we
fished
just,
that.
yeah, yeah. So we just have more receivers there because we're more likely to encounter fish. And then we know that fish is alive and that it was there. But yeah, so 5 miles, we can't hear 5 miles away. So a fish could like swim, somehow manage to navigate the gauntlet. And sometimes they do for a while and then they show up. But usually, if they're moving around a fair amount, and especially for fish that are coming into the rivers at some point to spawn, like we're going to make contact with them at that point, at least during that part of the year, whenever they're in there.
Well, I think like trying to go through your guys' thought process of you as you've evolved with this, and obviously it's like anything else, the money, because none of this stuff
Yeah.
is inexpensive. We've talked about that in the past too. But I would say, like, if you're in the open waters for you Wisconsin guys or people that fish that, and you were kind of in the outer Green Bay or southern Little Bay or Big Bay to knock in some of that water that can get a little deeper and open.
Yeah.
If you miss them a little bit, it's not like trying to find your car keys. Like, oh well, like you said, we'll find another receiver. But if you're trying to see how those movements are, like for spawning on a certain reef or in a river mouth or something like that, probably you're going to have more coverage. There is what I'm hearing, so that we
Yeah.
can see that specific movement better.
Right. And I mean, the one thing about having them all over the Great Lakes too is we're just learning a lot about what fish do in general. And there's a lot of species where out in that really deep water, they just don't go there. And so, you're not getting a lot of detections for your investment and the time and the effort. I mean, the cost is one thing, but we're still to the point that people physically have to go out on the water and get these things back. A lot of them are programmed now where we can like shoot them up to the surface, and we're not trying to snag them back off the bottom. But we're not to the point where we can just like satellite into them and they tell us everything we need to know and we can leave them down there. They need a new battery every year, and so we've got to download them. So yeah, it's a trade off between like how many can I afford? What do I need to know? And like how much man or how many people do I have that can go out and actually like maintain them? And between GLaDOS and really on our end, we get a lot of help from the Fish and Wildlife Service out of Green Bay that maintains a lot of receivers for us. And then we do a fair amount of it as well. DNR does some as well.
For government stuff, I know you can't say anything, but wink, wink. For government stuff, you guys all work together pretty good. Like, it's surprising on how well the multiple organizations do on this. You'd think the egos or the budgets or the finger pointing would be more than what it is. I'm sure it happens at times, but from what I've seen, it's been pretty chill.
Yeah, this is just like a win for everybody. We all have the same. Usually, the research priority or the thing that we're trying to address is something like the state agency wants to know. So they kind of come to us at the co-op unit, and that's our approach. Well, if this is something that you want to know and it's important to anglers and the fishery, then we're going to try to figure out a way to make this happen. And then we work with our partners that are also interested. I mean, everybody wants walleye populations and whitefish populations and sturgeon populations to be healthy and be around for the future. So it's pretty easy to be on the same page most of the time. It's just logistically, yeah, there can be challenges at times.
So is the main focus? I mean, it's like we're the bass of the north, right? Is as I say, we being a walleye guy, and that's primarily where most of the dollars and the focus is at, or not
I would
necessarily.
say not so much. We've got a probably more invested in Lake Whitefish right now than in walleye, and
Really?
quite a bit of bass. We've been doing quite a bit of smallmouth bass work. But whitefish are Lake Erie has them, and there's some work going on with whitefish in Lake Erie, but they're far more important to the fisheries, especially the commercial side of things and tribal side of things. In like Lakes Huron, Michigan, and Superior, they're just like a much bigger component, and that's not surprising when you look at like how much cold water habitat is are in the sort of upper lakes versus the lower lakes. Even and there's some whitefish work going on in Lake Ontario as well.
Well, and people listening to this maybe aren't familiar with Green Bay. In the wintertime, a lot of the guys, when they tell you, hey, you're going on a walleye trip, you're really not. You're going to fish for walleyes for the first 10 minutes of daylight and maybe the last 10 minutes, and you're going to go catch a whole bunch of whitefish. And they do
Yeah.
fight hard. And I hear guys say they taste good. I don't know. I
Yeah,
don't know.
I mean fantastic. And we actually tagged 75 whitefish on the ice last winter with some guides that helped us get the fish so we can see that for the fish that are contributing to that fishery specifically, like where do they end up going to spawn? Like where are they coming from? So they reeled them in and we did the surgeries right in the ice shack and let them go.
Don't whitefish live a heck of a lot longer than walleyes?
I would actually say about the same.
Oh,
So our work here is we see walleyes in their 20s,
hmm.
off and on. They're not common. They're pretty similar to Erie in terms of age. Can they live to 25? Sure. And really, like that's what we've seen with the whitefish too. We'll see them in their 20s. But like a 20 some year old whitefish is a really old whitefish.
So they're not lake trout.
No.
Did you see that deal that just came out with the guy that caught I think it was in Wisconsin. If it wasn't Wisconsin, it was Michigan that caught the lake trout with the original tag, and it was, like, from 1970 or something. Did you
Yeah,
see
I
that?
did not see that.
Just, like, a couple days ago, I saw it on some social media. It was, like, one of the original tags that they used, and they went back, and I can't remember. It was like 40 some years old.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, we see some sturgeon like in the Winnebago system that got metal tags hanging off them still from, maybe as far back as the 70s or the 80s.
So it is on Green Bay, whether it's just because of the individual people working there or the biology of the way the system is there really for people to have listened to some of our stuff with the Lake Erie stuff and Vandergoot stuff that he did specifically with us? Is there really any major differences in that program? I mean, you guys have, I don't know, maybe shallower and deeper water, a little bit more kind of, but um,
I think what I like to Green Bay is sort of like Lake Erie in miniature, if you want to think of it. I mean, or Green Bay is big, but the end down by Lambeau Field, where the Packers play, is kind of like the western basin of Lake Erie. It's shallow, warm, kind of turbid, a lot of fertility, a lot of forage. As you move further north, like towards the Bays Danak, in northern Lake Michigan, things start to get colder, deeper, and a little less fertile. And so that's kind of the gradient you see from the western basin to the eastern basin in Lake Erie. There's, I would say, I think more deep water in the eastern basin of Erie than there is on the northern end of Green Bay, but kind of a similar gradient.
okay, interesting. So what are some of the things that I know you're going to bring some? We're going to let you drive today. That's the best thing about the biologist, like zero notes, like just like zero.
Yeah,
You guys drive it, and my job is just going to be to kind of help us dumb it down because sometimes you guys like to use a lot of big words, and even though we know what it means, we don't know what that means. You know what I'm
right.
saying? We just
Sure.
have to simplify some of that stuff. And I know we've had, if you guys are listening to this, haven't seen some of the other stuff like with Travis Hartman or Matt Faust, they're pretty good at dumbing it down for us fishermen to be like, this is good for us, this is this, and not all those scientific words. So,
Yep.
what are some of the things that we've maybe learned from this acoustic telemetry deal on Green Bay and how that applies or how it's different from Erie?
So we're gonna talk a lot about in the southern part of the bay, like we were trying to learn where do the fish spawn, because there were some evidence to suggest that maybe the underlying model that we were considering wasn't entirely accurate, and telemetry offered us a way to like kind of test some of those assumptions. Specifically, there's some pretty significant runs of walleyes in a lot of the rivers in southern Green Bay, and we mostly kind of thought like that's where the fish came from, right? The folks that are out fishing for walleyes in Green Bay after they get out of the rivers are catching the river fish, and those rivers are what's supporting the fishery. And that's how the Wisconsin DNR primarily dealt with assessing the adult population, right? Is to go into the rivers and sample when they're in the rivers, and that's going to give us like a pretty good idea of what's going on. But there was always some like inkling that there's probably some reef spawning going on or open water spawning, in particular like around the Sturgeon Bay area where there'd been evidence of recruitment or reproduction occurring, but we just really had no idea. Like, well, we know the Fox River is really important, and you can walk on the boats there when the fish are in, and there's a lot of walleyes in the river. And we know like some go in the Menominee and some go in the Peshtigo and some go in the Econo. But it's like, well, which one's the most important? And what about, is Sturgeon Bay important? Are any of these other locations really important? And so that's kind of like what we were trying to figure out on the southern end of the bay. On the northern end of the bay, Michigan's been jaw tagging walleyes for quite some time. And the one thing that you've probably talked about a bunch on the show is just the effects of like quagga mussels and zebra mussels. And the effect of the mussels is a lot more pronounced on the northern end of Green Bay, where, when I was a kid, the bays de Noc were like legendary. Every magazine talked about all big fish, and there was good walleye recruitment up there. And now like recruitment is not great. I mean, there's actually some stocking that goes on up there, and part of that is the mussels are probably influencing it in a lot of ways. There's not a lot for a little fish to eat in northern Green Bay when they
And
hatch.
so is that a lot because is the water clarity so clean that the food chain kind of starts getting wiped out at the micro level there with the plankton and all that stuff? Or
Yeah, I mean, these mussels are like turning over the basically the water column, I don't know how many times in a week, but they're effectively removing most or a lot of the food items that a larval walleye or a larval whitefish or a larval anything would like to feed on when they first hatch and they're looking for food. So one thing that Michigan DNR had noticed from their jaw tag recoveries is that the fish they were tagging, the walleyes, were being recovered like on average further and further away over time. Like they were leaving the bays de Noc and going somewhere else. And so conventional tagging, where we put a tag, and we use these still, but you stick a tag like this on the back of the fish, or a jaw tag, which Lake Erie's, there's a lot of jaw tag walleyes there. You get only information from the fish that you see again, and you only get where they were when they were caught. You don't know how they got there, right? I just know I tagged them here and I caught them over here. Well, telemetry allows you to,
Fill in the missing pieces.
yeah, and you don't have to catch the fish again to get information because hopefully it passed a receiver here and there along the way. And so in northern Green Bay, we were really interested in, well, where are these fish going? Like after they spawn in Little Bay to Knock or like the Escanaba River up in northern Green Bay, where do they go? And how many of them are doing it? And are we seeing like significant overlap where Little Bay to Knock walleyes might actually be like southern Green Bay walleyes for a good portion of the year? And so it was kind of two different questions, but we use the same approach to try to answer those questions by putting transmitters in fish.
Yeah, I mean, back in my tournament days, I can remember, guys running from Green Bay or, Cedar and over that neck of the woods halfway up to Big Bay or Little Bay or whatever it may be. And Little Bay to get your smalls and Big Bay to get your bigs, ironically. But I don't know anybody that hardly fishes that anymore. And granted, it's the isolation of it or whatever. But the one thing is have we found anything about the smallmouth there? Because I know guys that really do well on smallmouth
Yeah.
on Big and
I
Little
would
Bay.
say like it's still got to be on people's lists for especially big fish. I mean, honestly, we tagged again up there this spring and we put a tag in like the biggest walleye. It was like 32 inches long and it had eggs, so it probably weighed well over 10. Um, so that's still like I one of those destinations for people that are looking to catch fish. I think what we found is a lot of those fish that maybe would have been there more of the year are coming back later in the year, and you're not seeing them till like November, December. And I know there is a pretty prominent fishery up there during that time window for bigger fish. We have not done anything with smallmouth in the bays to knock at this point. We've tagged in like a bunch of the tributaries and then also really focused on smallmouth along the Door Peninsula on the bay side, like Sturgeon Bay, Eagle Harbor, Egg Harbor, some of those bays. It
I'm gonna
well,
put a map up so that people can see this that are watching it on YouTube. You guys on Spotify are just SOL.
yeah. So yeah,
But
you can see the Sturgeon Bay canals noted there on the map. So our bass work has really been focused in that part of the bay, and then you can kind of see the bays to knock way up there in the north. And then the Fox River down at the bottom, that's Green Bay. That's where Lambeau Field is, and um, just to give you some reference. And when I'm talking a little bit here, I'll talk some more about the fish moving around. But that Chambers Island line in the middle of the map there, that's kind of the demarcation we use to denote northern from southern Green Bay when we start talking about fish moving around quite a bit. But most of the work we've done is up north has been focused on either whitefish or walleye.
so have we been doing this long enough to, like you said about, seeing where these fish are actually spawning? Have we done this long enough to know that like fish A12 or whatever the number is, in one that hey, that went to Larson's Reef twice, or it went to, the Fox River 2 years, but then the third year it went to Larson's Reef or whatever?
Yep. Yeah, so we tagged 359 walleye between 2017 and 2019. And about 250 of those were in southern Green Bay, and the rest were in northern Green Bay. And then we tracked them we had the tags run for 4 years. They could run for 10, but we just shut them off because we knew we were going to be doing more tagging. And when you get all these fish piled into a river together, they can start like colliding with each other when you're trying to hear them on the receivers. And we have not really had it happen. And at times we've had like more than 50 of these things all in the same general area. But what we found out in southern Green Bay is that the Fox River is in fact really important. About 40% of our fish ended up being Fox River spawners. The Menominee River was about 25%. Just saw a few fish go in the Akanto, but like the thing that we were trying to figure out is like how important is open water spawning, and Sturgeon Bay was pretty important. Like roughly 17% of our fish went there. And so we tagged all the southern Green Bay fish in the fall, so outside of spawning. And then we watched what they did over the next 4 years, like where did they go? And then there was 10% that just spawned somewhere out in southern Green Bay, and we don't really know where because we only had our receivers set up as lines at that point. And now they are gridded, like I said, every 5 miles, so we can kind of see better where fish are.
So, like on Erie, their fish spawn crazy amounts of different places, and they've
Yep,
proved this now multiple different ways, I guess. But acoustics is obviously a little more, to your point, is a little more specific and
yep,
guaranteed, if you will. But I just wonder because no offense, we have a lot more fish than you.
yeah.
So I wonder where is Green Bay with population wise, and I guess where I'm ultimately going is if you guys had another 20 million fish, would they be like, whoa, too many girls in the fox, so we're gonna go over here now? Maybe is that a thought?
Yeah, that's actually interesting. Like we think that might be a reason why whitefish started like recolonizing some of the rivers over here is that maybe that the spawning habitat like out in the bay started to get a little crowded and they started like looking around. We found like somewhere between like around 12 like primary, what we would call primary spawning locations, like a specific river or Little Bay to Knock or Sturgeon Bay. So I don't know what would happen if we had 50 million walleyes like Lake Erie. I don't think that's possible. Um, but I don't think like we've got cases where there's too many fish using a place, so to speak, that would maybe like for they were pretty loyal is the other thing I should say. Certainly the river fish, they were pretty loyal. We saw a little bit of straying where they didn't necessarily go in the same river every year, but the Peshtigo, Akano, and Menominee, the mouths of those rivers are like fairly close together. And so that's where we saw like a little bit of swapping. I don't think we saw any fish like switch behavior. I'd have to look, but like a lake fish suddenly became a river spawner, and if it was like a really low percentage of those fish. But what it's really led us to is like, well, what is going on in Sturgeon Bay? Because a lot of or a fair number of fish went there, and Sturgeon Bay is like sort of an inconsistent history of natural reproduction or recruitment. So sometimes we do see age zero fish there when the DNR will see them when they go out and survey, but then sometimes there's pretty long stretches where they do not. And it's like, well, we have a fair number of fish going there. We should probably look into this a little more. And so we got additional funding from the US Fish and Wildlife Service, and we're now focused on we tagged 50 spawning adults from Sturgeon Bay this spring. We're curious like how much do they contribute to southern Green Bay? How much time do they spend out in the bay? But we're also trying to figure out like where exactly might they be spawning, and then we're going to go there and like look for eggs and larvae to see if we're getting successful hatching at those spawning locations to try to like better inform us of a like, all right, they come to Sturgeon Bay, but where are they actually doing this and where are we getting larval fish out of?
So, is there any correlation? Because I know, like on Erie, again, I want to keep saying that, but I know a lot of guys have
Yep.
listened to this info because we've been so deep in, and it's all I know.
Right.
Is there seems to be a correlation with the size of fish. Both that the biggest ones spawn earliest, and then also they tend to use certain. I don't even want to say because you guys go listen to the podcast there, but they tend to use a certain river or a certain area or something. Are we seeing that same thing on Green Bay?
Not anything that we could discern from our data. Like we've actually spent a fair amount of time looking at entry and exit times for males and females into the rivers. And what's kind of interesting is like in the fox, honestly, like the females get there a little bit earlier than the males a lot of the time. Statistically, it's not different, but at a minimum, they're kind of coming in at about the same time, and we haven't seen anything like real clean that would suggest like bigger fish are necessarily there sooner than like smaller fish, or bigger fish go to the Menominee more than they go to the Fox or something along those lines. We haven't specifically like really tried to target that question. So like when we tag fish, we're trying to get a good representation of the overall population, which means far fewer big fish are going to get transmitters than say your 18 to 21-inch fish that are more of like the bread and butter of the population in the fishery. So yeah, we had certainly like a fair number of fish like over 30 inches that got transmitters, but you'd probably need to focus a little more on those bigger fish to really figure out, do they do something totally different than smaller fish?
I might have had this conversation privately with a couple fisheries people that you know, and the look that I got, I can only describe as something my mother's done many times with me, because I said, "Is this like prison?" And immediately they were like, "What? How are you?" I'm like, "Well, this is like the big dog gets to do what he wants first, and then when we're in a big prison, there's more of that going on versus small prison." I a lot of this is probably just you don't it's a big body of water and you just don't have the sheer numbers like we do. Like
Yeah.
around here it's like, eat or be eaten. It's like a family
Right.
with 12 kids versus two.
Yeah, I think the most important part, and this might be like a little bit different than Erie, maybe not, but just like each river is sort of not exactly happening at exactly the same time. And so, like, the Menominee fish do enter a little bit later than the fox fish. And so, I think that helps with, maybe when the fox fish first get in there, flows aren't right or the water temperature nosedives 10 degrees, but the Menominee fish were a little bit later and like maybe they didn't encounter that temperature drop. And so things go a little better for them. And even though the fox still produces maybe a lot of fish, you've got sort of that like spectrum of spawning groups. People will refer to it, and a big word for you is like we call it like a portfolio effect. You got all these different sources of
That's
fish.
three syllables there.
Yeah, yeah. And you're not like
And
totally reliant on any single one source. So if one has sort of like a bad year, maybe another one had a better than average year and they sort of offset each other a little bit. So the big small thing, like timing of spawning, I do think it exists from all of my work I've done everywhere that bigger fish, especially females, tend to spawn earlier or arrive earlier. But it's really hard when you're looking at like, especially like from north to south in Green Bay, the temperature gradient is so different. Northern Green Bay, it could be like 80 down here, and we go up there and there's still like chunk ice floating around in Little Bay to knock. Uh, and so those fish are spawning a lot later than like a fish in southern Green Bay.
well, whether it's weather swings, anybody listening to this can relate to the fact that just yesterday here it was 85 degrees or something, and today it was like 40 something, and you're like, huh? It's been a really cool and super windy year, but I think it's also just trying to put this in people terms, right? Like you think about somebody that's your wife or your kids are at school, and you're like, if you tracked, this sounds really bad, but if you tracked like two women, right, and just said, hey, but you're trying to base the entire United States or world
Yeah,
on what two women did. And that's why I know in some of the past podcasts that we've talked about, these guys are like, it's just the more data that you get, just like anything that you're studying, the more comfortable they feel with their numbers, that they're having a good bigger sampling, right?
right. And I mean it makes sense for the fish to not have everybody spawning at the same time, just because having early and late spawners ensures that maybe at least somebody's going to encounter better conditions for survival. And that this kind of like goes into the second thing that I was interested in talking about today is like it's really hard to figure out those things like we just talked about in a big lake, with millions of fish. And so sometimes it's easier to go into a smaller lake and see if you can solve some of these problems. So,
Shooting fish in a smaller barrel, you can miss smaller, right?
right. And like one of the things that people often think, anglers and biologists, is bigger females are better parents, right? We need to really protect those big females because they're the future. They're the ones that we need the most. And a lot of that is based just on sheer number of eggs, which is accurate, right? They have more eggs. But it's really hard to like test this in the wild. Like we can do stuff in a tank or a hatchery, but that's not Lake Erie. That's not Green Bay. That's not even a small lake in northern Wisconsin. So we were really interested in this and collaborated with some of our DNR folks. Escanaba Lake is a very famous lake in northern Wisconsin. It's probably besides Oneida Lake, probably got the longest history of walleye research, like continuous sampling. Every year there's a population estimate.
Oneida in New York, you
Yes, yeah, yeah.
okay.
So, but genetics now offers us the ability, just like ancestry.com or whatever website you want to talk about. Like, if I have information on parents and I have information on offspring, I can link the two together and I can figure out, well, this was your mom and this was your dad, or at least I can tell this is your mom. But in order to do that, I got to be able to get my hands on enough parents and enough kids, and that would be almost impossible to do in Lake Erie. But in like 100-acre lake or so, something like that in northern Wisconsin, or 200 acres, we did it. So we went out, we took fin clips from like over 1,000 parents over like a 3-year window, and then got fin clips from over 1,000 like age 0 or age 1 walleye. Those would be the kids. And we were actually able to link 66% of the kids to at least one parent. And that number would be really low in like Lake Erie. We probably wouldn't get any, honestly. We'd get no linkages. It's just too big. And what we found is that the size of a female and like how fast she grew and age, like they just had very, very weak effects on the probability of producing at least one offspring. So of the kids, it wasn't like really noteworthy that, well, a whole bunch of them came from like the bigger females. There was a little bit of a sign of it, but just really weak. And we saw nothing for boys. Like it didn't really, the size of the male, how old the male was, how fast it grew, anything like that. I didn't show up. And see, my theory always is that the biggest fish in a population may not be the best. And like for a fish to get that old, often they're like not the fastest growing um fish. They're like a little bit slower growing. And when they were like a 4-year-old or a 5-year-old, they may not have been like the best fish. But they do have the genetics to live a really long time. So I thought like the growth rate of the females was really going to be the thing that told us whether they were like the most fit fish.
I think that one topic is something that again, I talk with a lot of biologists, and it's funny because you guys are like politicians a little bit. I mean, you guys do work for the government, but I understand it just because a bunch of them that I know, again, they know that some of this, and I tell them it's not like there's no like surprise here, but we run a media company. Like we're here talking about this stuff, and the point is to not get somebody or whatever. It's to educate and let them know what's going on. But the point of what I'm getting at is a lot of these guys that I know that, and most of them,
Yeah.
they're always even behind the scenes, after fishing, drinking a beer, or whatever, or not on camera. They're very reluctant, number one. Number two, often have a very different opinion than the person sitting across from them, as far as, what we just talked about, this whole gene pool. And most of the guys, like Chris Vandergood is an example, who would arguably have as much time as most with this. is he said, check back. That's always his answer was always the late and the great Goot. Check back with me in 5 years,
Yeah,
check
yeah,
back with me. And again, like the analogy I give guys is I know when we keep these giant fish, because I'm not an advocate of that, is that I know what happens when we eat one,
yeah,
30 incher. I know the end result on that, right?
right.
But a lot of these guys, the thing that I get, besides you don't want to eat a 30 incher, that's my opinion at least. But is it's almost like deer, where some of these guys, some opinions are, and again, all these are opinions, but the gene pool on a deer, like these guys want to grow. A deer is not just a deer, and that's why guys will self-manage their properties. And I feel like us sportsmen sometimes don't self-manage enough, because keeping a limit to keep a limit, you know what I mean, versus a female with eggs in it and this and that. Like any one fish, yes, that one doesn't make a difference, but it's no different than anything else. When you add all of this up and we all are doing it, we can be a much better advocate of our sport and our population. So
Yeah, and I mean, I think it goes back to it's just important that if they might spawn earlier, right? Or something else that's different, and it's just important in my mind to always just have a very balanced population where you've got spawners at like all age classes as much as you can. You can't like make a year class happen, right? But you're just trying to have that balance. And what the thing that was really interesting is we found that no female that was less than 18 inches long. We did not see an offspring from any of the fish that small. And so like we
well,
know that females mature later than males, but
yeah. So how old? This is a question I know we've covered before, but again, for the newcomers here, approximately how old or how many years does a female have to be sexually mature, and we think she's going to spawn, whether she does a good job or not?
so maturity is more based on size than age. And in Lake Erie, a fish probably gets to 15 inches, and like I'm gonna say, I'm gonna be safe here and guess for sure less than 4 years. Whereas like in northern Wisconsin, a female walleye, or they might not get to 15 inches until they're like a 5 or 6 year old. And so, yeah, I mean, it's just differences in growth. Some lakes up there are faster. I'm generalizing.
There's a
So,
reason I say Winnebago wall hangers to piss off my Wisconsin buddies.
well,
You know,
Winnebago walleyes though might they grow probably as fast as a Lake Erie walleye.
come on
And
now.
yeah, they grow really fast. And so do Green Bay walleyes. Um, yeah, there are places where they grow really fast, but in Escanaba Lake, like I'm just gonna say off the top of my head, like a 15-inch female is probably somewhere between, and the young end 4, but probably more like 5 to 7.
Are we attributing that to being shallower, warmer, more food, or
I
I
think
mean,
it's more
you
like
get
yeah, smaller, like not probably higher overall density, like on a per acre basis. Like you're not talking about millions of acres of water, you're talking about 200 acres of water. Some of it's going to be forage, Green Bay, Lake Erie have things like gizzard shad and alewives, and Escanaba Lake is going to be perch. That's what the walleye are going to be eating. So right there, you're taking away, gizzard shad are like a critical thing to grow big walleyes in a lot of places, or
we got a
something
lot of them.
like a gizzard. Yeah, right.
Which
So, but it,
a fun fact, and you can fact check me on this one, but I believe the number that we've been told by previous biologists on here is after about 9 months that a gizzard shad gets so big that he almost outgrows the predators, meaning
yeah,
walleyes.
and it can be even worse as you go like further south and get into some systems where the gizzard shad are as big as the predators. They just get huge because the conditions are really conducive. The one thing in the Great Lakes is gizzard shad winter kill, and so it kind of keeps a little bit of a control mechanism on size and even abundance. But if you go down to somewhere like I worked in Tennessee, and gizzard shad don't normally winter kill there, so they
Yeah,
can they can get a lot bigger.
and
But
I've
the
heard
thing, oh, go ahead.
I've heard we're at. Maybe you can I see a lot like I'm pinning all you biologists against each other. But we're almost what I've been told on the north end of the gizzard shad range because I've had them come up through the hole in the middle of winter.
Yeah.
Like,
I actually think it's pretty amazing that they do exist this far north. I mean, they're out in like South Dakota, but it's about this. And I think if you didn't have the rivers like inputting warm water into the Great Lakes, I don't know that they would occur. Maybe in like southern Lake Michigan or something. Maybe, but the rivers I think are pretty critical to their existence, because that warm water, and they can get into the rivers in the winter where it's maybe at least somewhat warmer. I don't know, but yeah, I don't. I when I was in Tennessee, I when I got to Lake Erie and there was gizzard shad, I was like, now wait a minute, I wasn't thinking they would be this far north.
so I kind of hijacked us and jerked us to the side there, which
Yeah,
is typically what we do. But getting back to, it was Escanaba Lake. That's your kind of case study that you're hoping to have a smaller pool to eliminate outside factors as much or what have you. It was there any like aha moments that came from that you're like, okay, we need to look into this for something else, or we didn't suspect this was happening?
yeah. I mean, I think the 18-inch thing is interesting. I mean, a lot of states, including Wisconsin, have like a 15-inch minimum as their walleye harvest length limit. And a lot of times we think of that as like we're trying to give the fish at least one opportunity to spawn before they might be harvested. And that could be true. Like some of those fish may have spawned, they may have been mature, but really like what our stuff suggests is in order to give them a chance to like contribute an offspring, they might need to be a little bit bigger than 15 inches. So, and the one thing that we found, and this is what we always preach to everybody, is it's mother nature that matters the most. And what we saw is in the years when conditions were good, it didn't matter how big of a female you were, everybody did better. It's sort of like a rising tide floats all boats. And so the probability of producing an offspring was just higher for all sizes of walleye in that lake when things were good. And when they weren't, everybody was also down. And so in my mind, like the overall message is we're always looking to kind of maximize what we get out of those really good years because we live off of them. I mean, Lake Erie, when a big year class is worth, I might even say billions of dollars, but at least millions of dollars, right? Same on Green Bay. When you have a strong year class that hits that fishery, and it's easier for people to catch lots of fish, that is like a boon in a lot of
100%. I
ways.
mean, I'm not like a pessimist, but I'm always kind of I have a platform and I try to, I feel like it's my obligation to be a good sportsman. You know what I mean? The analogy I use with people privately in the past has been, there's garbage men that, and I'm not picking on garbage men, but there are garbage men that have won the lottery that
Yeah.
make a normal wage and they win 10 million, 20. Again, the number doesn't matter, right? Somebody wins a whole lot more money than they ever would see, no matter what you do for a living. And all of a sudden they're broke in 3 years,
Yeah.
and you go, hey, we wasted this. And I know that with our guys, we talk about, we just came out of a high water datum and there tends to be a correlation with a better spawn. And now we're not, and our spawns the last little bit haven't been nearly as good, even
Yep.
though we had 4 or 5 that everyone's like, we're rich, daddy.
Yeah,
But
yeah. But I mean, I guess the point I'm trying to make is that you don't know when those are going to happen. You can't make mother nature like make the conditions that
make
you
hay
need.
while the sun is shining.
So yeah, you want to maximize your potential when you have those windows, and that means like having the best, I think, distribution of ages of spawners out there. And like for Escanaba Lake, I would maybe argue trying to maximize the number of fish that are at least 18 inches, in a lake of that type is like, well, I can't make it so next year's a good year, but I can like manage my harvest and I can try to like maximize the diversity of ages I have in the population. So when I hit that good one, I kind of like get the most out of it that I can, because it might be a while before I have another one, just like you said.
Yeah,
And that could mean like changes to harvest regulations to like make sure like, well, we need to make sure we've got a lot of 5 to 8 year old fish in the population as well. And
yeah, I think the thing that we've learned is you can't the weather and things that there's nothing we could do. Like I know our
yeah,
fishery guys here have said, well, what you use? Because people always say, well, you're stocking steelhead. You guys need to stock walleyes. And it was like our guys here privately said, well, what do you use as a rearing pond for the 11th largest freshwater body in the world? But so like you said, you got to take advantage of when you get the good ones and try to manage until you don't. And I can remember fishing Fort Peck probably
yep,
25, 26 years ago. And when this sounds like an exaggeration, but it's not much of one. We caught a 10 pounder or a 10 incher. And
yeah,
they were missing so many year classes. And that's a body of water, especially then, that you don't think of as having pressure because it's just so big. And that it was just they just had bad spawns or there are other factors or who knows, maybe it's something like a zebra mussel but not a zebra mussel
yeah,
or something. But yeah, we had the same thing with smallmouth here in Erie. If you remember that, there was I don't remember what years that was, but it was like you could catch a 5 pound smallmouth or a 10 inch or 12 incher,
right.
and there was not many of those 2 to let's say 4 pounders.
Yeah, yeah. But I mean, it's just sort of like probably things we already knew, is you're just trying to have the best team, if you want to think of it, or population, like going into each year, because you don't know which of those years is going to pull off that giant year class that bolsters the fishery for the next decade, or maybe in the case of the Great Lakes. And I just don't think that we approach it. I think we often just think of like immediacy and like what should the harvest be this year and should we do something, and it's more of like hedging your bets. Like, well, I need to do things that give me in my mind, not just a bunch of big fish, but like all ages, because if it happens to be that small fish spawn late, and in that year late was the window that you wanted to hit, I sure probably wanted some small fish out there, some small females, because the big ones might have come in so early and they just got 10-degree temperature drop or whatever. And none, they just don't produce many young. Whereas, like, another group came in at just the right time for that year. And maybe you don't get a big year class, but you avoid like a weak or missing year class, right? You got
I mean,
something to go on.
to a certain extent, let's just be honest. What we're saying here is luck and divine intervention both seem to play a little bit of a role.
Yeah. I mean, you're never it's just like we have a few levers at our command, and they're not very powerful levers.
Yeah, I mean, yeah,
Yeah.
there's what can you do, right? I mean,
Well, you
besides have
can
somebody
you can
come net them out.
right.
I
I
mean,
mean,
there's nothing positive.
sure, we've definitely been through situations where harvest was significant enough to really alter a population. Um,
And when was that?
well, I mean, you got to go way back. I mean, like, overfishing was the reason that walleyes in Green Bay and Lake Erie declined at some point. I mean, there was other causes too, like pollution and habitat destruction, but w- walleyes all around the country, and they were commercially fished, and so we know that it is possible to overfish a walleye population, right? And we've kind of moved ourselves away from having that happen
We
very often. At least,
we had a
I'm not gonna say it never happens anymore anywhere, but we've kind of learned that lesson, I think, at least fairly well.
we had a podcast here with a fisheries guy, and he was talking about, and again, we're talking like I want to say hundreds of years ago. I think I'm accurate that we had a herring fishery here out
Yep.
here that was insane, and this
Yeah.
lake was much cooler way back.
Yep.
And that they literally like it was that was the money. That
Yep.
was the money fish. And they literally are you familiar? You're probably obviously familiar with this. And they netted them out. Like the commercial fishery literally eliminated them, but they had them kind of like your Escanaba Lake. There was some small lake or rearing pond essentially in Pennsylvania, but like small. Are you familiar with this?
I don't.
So
That part I'm not. The fishery, I know about, but
So, like, yeah, check this out. So they literally have like these lake herring, ciscoes, whatever you, depending on
yep.
where you live, what you want to call them. And again, I feel silly telling a biologist this, but so there was a little bit different genetic to these herring had evolved, right? So there was a little bit different subspecies or whatever you want to call it of some type. And they these guys, when the population was dwindling down, some of the biologists had the wherewithal to say, hey, we need to put these, and they put them in this tiny like blue hole, like a little clear tiny body of water, but it had like a blue hole type of thing, cool water
Right.
coming in. Any rate, they're still in there to this day, and they're talking about doing an introduction of those back into the lake and using these original
Hmm.
ciscos with this subspecies. I'm gonna go listen to the podcast. I'm slightly misspeaking on the
Yeah,
probably
yeah.
the
I don't.
exact terms, but they're trying to use this subspecies that did so well until we ran nets that were 10 miles long and top to bottom and just wiped them out. So
Right.
I thought that was fascinating that they had stayed in there and um,
Yeah, I
interesting.
haven't heard. I mean, I'm familiar. There's a lot of recovery efforts for Cisco going on around the Great Lakes, but I wasn't familiar with what was going on in Erie. But yeah, it's just I think we're much better at managing the harvest side of things and keeping things like away from harvest levels that would be like really detrimental to a population, and that comes with learning from it, and also just like the economic value that's attached to not just people coming to harvest fish, but just the people coming to fish, right? They're coming there to catch fish, and that's been pretty important, I think, in getting us to make different decisions about how we harvest different fish species.
I think the coolest thing about us doing the podcast is we have a very diverse amount of people on here. I mean, from bass pros to, walleye famous guys. I've come up with some pretty good ones of just oddball things that I think people find interesting. And surprisingly, you biologists, who normally I think of as being boring people, no offense, but I mean, Travis Hartman, I'm throwing him firmly under the bus
Yeah,
for
he's kind of boring. I will say
Huh,
that. I'm just
I oh, no, he is.
yeah,
I mean, when I say years, I'm talking for 20 years, I'd be at a sports show, and I always would see him and give him, some shit and say, "Hey, thanks for warming up the crowd, all the people that just wanna sit down to get, off, just stretch their
right.
legs or whatever." And, then I'd go up and I'd be like, "Yeah, now I'm gonna make it rain." Like, nobody wanted to hear that. Now, the amount of people that are showing up for these biologist presentations in a regular boat and travel show. Um,
Yeah.
it's pretty crazy, but we actually, funny enough, we reached out to one there when the South Dakota had their state. I could be off again on this, but it was broken a couple of times within a few months of each other, and giant walleyes. And so we reached out to, I think Mark Fincel is his name. It's a good
Yep.
podcast to take
I know
a
Mark.
listen to.
Yeah.
Yeah, you guys all know. You guys are so Amish. Everybody knows everybody. Oh, I went to school with him, and but yeah, I just blindly reached out and got a hold of him, and it was fascinating. But the crazy part and where I'm going with this bringing this full back is, and why we like talking to you, and we hope to have you on again, Dan, is not only that we can do different topics, but when I had Fincel on, he's a very firm, like rigid, like matter of fact, loved it, like great information. He called me up, and by the time that we filmed to the time that we ran, because sometimes we try to get a little ahead,
Right.
so we make sure that we got good stuff and not just trying to patch something in there. He calls me up and he's like, we need to add that. And when I hear that from one of you government guys, I'm not going to lie to you, I cringe. And instead of being something that he was trying to retract as far as, getting in trouble or something, he said, we now in the, I'm going to say Missouri River, Oahe specifically, where he's stationed there. He said that they had since we spoke, and it was literally several weeks, that they had confirmed cases of zebra mussels.
Oh yeah.
And, so again, the point of this is we definitely hope to have you on again and see what, because it's, you could listen if you were on here 5 times, we can, all these different things, like this is this is a constantly changing situation, and the more data you have, the better we can get.
Yeah, and I mean we just tagged a bunch more walleyes. We also tagged some more up in the bays to knock. The one thing that happened up there is when we tagged the first batch, they were from the Michigan DNR's egg take, and we assumed, or thought most of those fish would go up into the Rapid and Whitefish rivers to spawn. That was always like kind of what they thought. And I think at most four of them did. The rest actually spawned out in Little Bay de Noc. They came back, but not in the rivers. So remember I said that, well, we keep seeing these fish leave, and that's what we saw with the telemetry too. But we're curious if maybe the river spawners are more likely to stick around than maybe the reef spawners, like maybe they behave a little differently. So we tagged another batch, well, several batches of fish up there this April, and we'll be watching what they do over the next 3 years. And we've got the smallmouth stuff going. We've tagged more than 1,000 whitefish, I think, at this point. So lots of interesting things going on with them. So
Assuming gets us all into trouble.
yeah, yeah. So yeah, we're really curious. We actually went into the Whitefish and Rapid Rivers this year with Michigan DNR. They got us the fish and got the fish from the actual river. So we're pretty confident they're river spawners, and we're going to see what those fish do compared to the fish that we collected like out in front of the river, so to speak.
So you teased me. I don't even know, but you teased me with a teaser that you were going to leave with us, mainly so that we can have you on again, but also so you have a little bit of time to get your ducks in a row. Is that true?
Yeah. So we're one of the big topics around fishing, no matter what kind, is forward facing sonar and what effects it might be having on um, populations of fish all around the country. And so we've just started a new project. We're doing things a little bit differently to try to get at like how much does this really matter, besides just having other sonar available to you and fishing the same lake a lot. Because if you fish the same lake a lot, even if you have no sonar, I would hope you would get better at it.
Well,
Right. So you
well,
got to kind of like tease those
we
things
all know
out.
that one guy.
But anyway, so we've got some people that had no experience ever using it, and they started fishing for walleyes in 6 lakes in northern Wisconsin about a month ago. And sometimes they get it and sometimes they don't. And on one lake only one of them gets it and the other one doesn't, and on the other lake they switch. And we're just trying to figure out like how much does it really affect catch rates, and how much of it is more like your experience on a body of water that that pretty well or have learned.
I would tell you what I think you're going to find is good fishermen are good fishermen, and then it's going to be even better. Shitty fishermen are the guy that just kind of wants to get away and be in the boat. It's that intermediate group
Yep.
that it gets pushed up, in one way or the other. And the catch rates, I think a lot of the different organizations have proven that the catch rates are going up. But what I would be interested if you guys are going to look at, because I know the Linders did a somewhat scientific one over the winter on crappies
Yeah.
in regards to mortality. Because again, even me, I've fished, I couldn't even, tons of places with this Missouri River system, and you got fish 50, 60 feet down and you're catching them. They're pretty much done. Generally speaking, those fish are dead, but people are letting them go. It's a big topic we have on my videos when people see me letting fish go and other things. And it's like, there are certain fish you can let them go and you may feel good about yourself. They're swimming away, but that fish is dead as a doornail. And just, you want to feel good about yourself. But our guys, I just had a conversation with Travis on some other stuff we're setting up for the future here, and just literally yesterday, and he said 30 feet is a pretty hard number. But temperature and handling also come into play
Yeah,
in that. So
definitely.
I would be interested to hear if you guys are going to mix in anything with that with mortality.
We aren't with the front facing sonar, but we are doing some work on Green Bay with both recreational or guides, anglers, and commercial folks to look at both walleye and whitefish. We're not really necessarily focused specifically on the depth thing, but it will be a component, right? We are going to get fish that probably have barotrauma, which is what we call the bends or whatever you want to call to it. And like we reeled them in too fast and they can't adjust to that pressure change. So that'll be a part of it. It isn't our focus, but we will get some information out of that work that'll help us maybe understand, like, when it's this deep and it's this hot, you're probably not going to get survival, or it's going to be pretty low. Like, there was some really great mortality work done on Mille Lacs several years back, maybe even a decade ago. But Mille Lacs doesn't get very deep.
Right.
So it's, almost like arguably probably not a factor there, given, I mean, I don't even know if there's any water over 30 feet there. There ain't a lot. If there
Not a
is,
lot.
yeah,
Not a
yeah.
lot.
The
Not a lot.
average depths I know are pretty shallow.
And
So
they probably have a little less temperature issues too.
yeah, the trickiest part is teasing out when you use telemetry to do things like that, you're adding stress to the formula by putting a tag on or in the fish, right? So if the fish was already stressed and then you tag it, that just little bit of extra could have been what kills it, and it wasn't the actual. So we've actually been like externally attaching the transmitters, like basically a zip tie, and then they're short-lived tags. So we don't have to cut them open,
Yep.
right? Because that definitely stresses the fish out more. And we don't want it to be like, I want to know what being caught, what effect that is, and not the effect of being caught and me doing a surgery on a fish that I normally probably wouldn't use for tagging because it's already under some level of stress.
So if anybody listening to this is like, what is he talking about, or want to see more of this, we actually have a video where I did a ride along with the USGS and the fishing, I guess, Ohio DNR, I guess technically. But we did the whole get them with the nets,
Yep.
do the surgery as they call it. So you guys want to see that live and direct, we have a video loaded up for that. That's quite
Yeah, I've
interesting.
actually seen that video. I think Matt sent it to me at one point, Faust.
Yeah. Did he tell you I had to poop in their boat?
No.
And you want to hear the best part? So we've talked about this because I feel like a good defense is a better offense. Um, I had the people that wasn't in their boat. I was in the other one, and it's a very long story how we got there. But we'll save that maybe for another different podcast because people
Okay.
probably aren't expecting a poop trip here.
Yeah,
But
no.
I had some people that were like, I would say, more scientific. They weren't like some of the people that that are a little more good with roughness. How about that?
Yeah.
Not as
Yeah, yeah.
polished. Is that as nice as PC
Yep.
as I can be? They were mortified. They were mortified. And then it comes to find out I was on a 360 live feed for Michigan State University that they forgot to turn off. And the guy came out and he looked like he was going to have a heart attack because he felt so bad for me. And maybe somebody named Chris was like, dude, he's proud of that. He's proud of it. You can't use that against him. He's happy. Don't worry about it. So, yeah,
Oh,
funny. That was a good time, but very neat video. So, is there anything else with what we've got today that maybe we skipped over, or we should polish up a little bit?
I don't think so. I mean, I think the only thing is, the outcome of the fish that we tagged in the bays to knock the first time. Over half of those fish did end up coming into southern Green Bay, and like 30 some percent of them actually left Green Bay and went into Lake Michigan and spent some time out there. So definitely like backed up what they were seeing with the jaw tags, but gave them a little better numbers on exactly how many of them were coming down into potentially like a different jurisdiction. Michigan and Wisconsin share Green Bay, and so that was kind of eye opening. And again, we're hoping, or not hoping, but trying to see, is that true of all the spawners up there? Like, are the river fish also prone to doing those things, or maybe less so than the reef spawning fish? So that's where we are on that end of the bay right now. But that's really it.
Good deal. Well, Dan, I can't thank you enough. Dan Isermann, Fisheries Biologist to the Stars. How about that for your title? Because you never know. You guys always have such long titles and everything. I just throw it out the window because I can't remember. And you guys work for who, and you guys are just all intermingled. But I can't thank you enough for not only your time, but your great info there. We hope to have you on again. So make sure you get a hold of us when we have something updated, because I love the updated stuff. We like the breaking news, if you will. So
Would love to do it. Thanks for having me.
So thanks for tuning into the Bigwater Podcast. We've got these things out on YouTube. We've got them on Spotify, all the digital download sites. If you can't find our podcast at this point, I promise you suck at catching walleyes, because I mean, Google, for God's sakes, people, Bigwater Fishing. We're even on TikTok now. We have a membership site also on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, all of that. Bigwater Fishing is the handle. Until the next episode.